Welcome to the S2 Cognition Podcast. S2 is the official cognitive evaluation in sports, from youth to pro, where athletes and coaches build to win.
Joining us today on the S2 Cognition Podcast is Will Hewlett. Will works with the Quarterback Collective and as a private quarterback instructor in the Jacksonville, Florida area. He and fellow quarterback instructor Denny Thompson work together out of 6 Points facility in Florida. We dive into the importance of training the cognitive aspect of a quarterback's game, how he trains decision-making with the college quarterbacks and youth quarterbacks that he works with, how he's managed his philosophy on training over the years, and if he considers cereal to be a soup. That interview with Will Hewlett is next on the S2 Cognition Podcast. Thanks for joining us.
Of course.
Before we get started talking cognition and quarterback position in terms of development today, what are you up to, working on, who you working with? How's your summer been?
Yeah, summer's been great. So we just wrapped up, my main gig is working with preparing collegiate and NFL quarterbacks for whatever the level of competition is. Sometimes that's in draft prep. Sometimes that's the upcoming season. So this year we've got, some college quarterbacks that are going to, have some big shoes to fill and some big seasons to have. Anthony Richardson at University of Florida. I work with Denny Thompson here at 6 Points, and we got Peyton Thorne at Michigan State. We got Jeff Sims at Georgia Tech. We got a ton of college quarterbacks all across the country. From schools like Tulsa, et cetera, that are going to have really exciting seasons. And then we've got a couple guys that are on NFL rosters, some competing to make the roster, some competing for the number 2 job. Hopefully some of them will get a shot at the starting position. Worked with a ton of coaches this offseason. A lot of FBS, FCS level guys on kind of tightening up practices and some different thoughts on how to organize training a little bit better off season, in season, et cetera. So that's really been since December. And then not that I don't get enough football, I decided to coach high school football, which I've been doing for the past 3 years. And I'm just a quarterback coach at St. Augustine High School here in North Florida, which has been a great learning experience for myself and really challenging in ways, and also helps keep me connected to the game. As a trainer, sometimes you get a little bit disconnected. And so I get to get in there and really see how things actually work. So that's really been my off season and just going into the fall now. So coach some ball and then get ready. We're preparing for our next draft class coming out for 2023.
Yeah. Will, did you, so Anthony Richardson, I was at LSU, Florida this past year. My wife and I were there. Were you happen to be there?
No, I couldn't make any of the college football games, unfortunately, without high school schedule. Hopefully this year we'll get to one.
Man, when he came in, dude, it's like something clicked completely with him. You saw a couple of throws and you're like, whoa, where's this guy been? And, where is this guy? Yeah. I mean, how's this offense going to be tailor-made around him? Because, man, he can throw the football.
So we've got a great relationship with the University of Florida staff. The new staff come in. And so we work directly with them, helping them kind of craft their training and their off season on the physical side for their quarterbacks. And Anthony, Denny Thompson's worked with him since he's, 10 or 11 years old. But when that guy walks in a room, he owns it. It changes, physically unbelievable, just a specimen. But what's really special about him is awareness and understanding of the game. He's the complete package. We're super excited to work with him this next off season.
Yeah, that's awesome. So Brandon, you just authored 2 doozy articles. One looking at the Wonderlic scores of NFL quarterbacks, and then looking at cognition. And then the second one was diving more into the cognition piece of the most important processes. Can you tell me how this process started? What questions brought you to this point to even write something like that?
Yeah, sure. So, we've been collecting data through the NFL draft process since 2016, and ended up getting obviously a lot of high level quarterbacks. And Will and I and a couple of other guys from Quarterback Collective have really been interested in just, hey, what makes these guys special? What makes them elite? Because it's clearly not just the physical metrics, right? Or we've got Wonderlic scores and measures of intelligence and intellect, and things haven't been panning out. And so, we give a battery of 9 different cognitive tests that we really feel like these quarterbacks have to engage in on the field. And so when we took that S2 overall score, which is sort of a basic measure of all 9, and ran a regression, it turned out that overall S2 score accounted for about 29% of career passer rating. And we're like, wow, that's pretty significant. If you can explain 10% of human behavior, you're on to something. But obviously quarterbacks have other things, right? They've got a lot of physical skills you've got to have game knowledge. You've got to have the ability to play, that grit, that psychological makeup. But we wanted to kind of follow up some of those things, and we looked at regressions for Wonderlic, which turned out Wonderlic accounts for less than 1% of career passer rating, and we looked at height, which is a common quarterback metric, and height accounted for about 3.5% of passer rating. So we felt really good about that. But as Will can tell you, it's not just this overall thing, right? It's are there any specific traits that make up these guys? And so we dug in a little bit further, and I think we were kind of mind blown a little bit when we looked at some of the cognitive skills that go into completion percentage and into interception rate. And the one thing that really stood out is tracking capacity. So your ability to broaden your attention, see the whole field, and really make sense of where everybody is moving in space. So how much time do I have to make this pass before a defender collapses on my guy? That predicted a huge proportion of completion percentage. And then impulse control. So your ability to really sort of control that impulse to make a bad throw, or to make a premature throw when you haven't made all your reads. Those 2 measures, tracking and impulse control, accounted for about 52% of completion percentage, and impulse control itself accounted for about 25% of interception rate. And so we thought that was really cool, and a lot of things that conceptually made sense for us, right? You've got to have those skills as a quarterback. And so, we thought it was really cool, ran some stuff by Will. Will thought it was impressive. And so wanted to get the dialogue started with somebody who's in the space, making a difference in quarterbacks. And when I personally think player development, sort of getting a player better, not just understanding a player, but actually working with them. In quarterbacks, first guy I think of is Will. So I know Will has spent a lot of time. Will and I have actually spent close to 100 hours on the phone trying to think up of developmental drills and these kind of things. And so, Will, you're in this space. What do you think about this kind of stuff? How do you work with these things? If you're a high school, college quarterback, how do you work with these kinds of skills?
Yeah, I think it's been really interesting digging into this. So, I'm not classically educated in biomechanics or anything in the science world. But my role in the quarterback industry for the past 15 years has been someone that's focused purely on the technical side of development, right? So, understanding, theories behind motor learning, constraint-based learning, ecological dynamics theory, all these things to help athletes really maximize their abilities. And so it's always been focused on the physical side, and like, how do we change motor pathways? How do we get athletes to move better? And at a point in my career, I realized that what I was doing was helping athletes get an opportunity to get on the field. But what I quickly realized is the differentiator is what keeps you on the field is the cognitive side of things. And so then there's this whole other rabbit hole. You're like, well, that's cool. Like, we've got this beautiful looking quarterback that can rip the ball, 70 yards downfield, can avoid tackles, and that's awesome. But if you have decision-making issues, I'll go take the 185-pound, skinny kid over there that knows how to anticipate, right? And I think if you look at the NFL, it is a collect, especially the quarterback side of things. The best athlete isn't always the best quarterback. I mean, if anything, the quarterback is the one person on the field that really could not play any other position on the field for the most part. Now, there's some guys now that absolutely can, and that's like an added bonus, right? When you've got you've got Patrick Mahomes. Well, actually, I don't even know if Patrick Mahomes can play another position, but someone like Cam Newton or Josh Allen, right? Lamar Jackson, for example, and so, but Drew Brees, I mean, what else is that guy doing on the field? Tom Brady, what else is that guy doing on the field? So if they're I mean, yes, they're elite because they're in the NFL, but there has to be a differentiator. And when I was first exposed to S2, it was no hesitation. I was like, oh, this is it. This is what understanding these 9 cognitive measurements and how they interact with football and quarterbacks. I was like, we always talk about the it factor, right? Like he's got the it factor. No one's been ever able to quantify that. And so I for the first time I felt like, oh, it factor, like we can put numbers on that. And so as you kind of lay this S2 template over the way of looking at the game, and you start seeing trends, you start seeing things in athletes, that you're like, oh, I wonder if he's good at that because it looks like he's good at that. So one of the things was like search efficiency. I remember observing an NFL quarterback every time he left the pocket, the amount of time it took for him to decide where to put the ball, like the post pocket outside, non-structured play. It was for me, it was visually noticeable. I could see him deciding something quicker than most NFL quarterbacks. And I think I texted Brandon. I was like, hey, do you know what this guy's score is on his search efficiency? And it was really high. And I was like, okay, see, I am seeing what I'm seeing. So being able to think through that, I think, and observe that, in real time has been super helpful. And it's an area we need to continue to dig into because I think, it's an evaluation game, right? Like the NFL draft, it's like we've got all these criteria we're trying to select quarterbacks on. Coaches have got all these criteria they're trying to select a starter on. If you're a high school coach, if you're a college coach, whatever the case is, having more information about your athlete, I think helps you make a better decision. And we don't have to think of it like we have to eliminate people. There's just adaptive measures that we may take for certain athletes, knowing that they have a low score here. It's like, well, we want to make sure the offense is tailored in this capacity. So it's been really an eye-opening experience, and continue to dig in the rabbit hole, the cognitive side.
That's exactly where I wanted to go into. I mean, we talked to Kirk Cousins, we've talked to Terry Fontenot, and there, about Drew Brees and these guys that you look at and you're like, okay, how in the world do some of these guys go in such a late round? They don't physically impress you, but they go on to have these insane, stellar careers and lead teams and make decisions and are able to process the game. It's amazing to me. That's what fascinates me. Is one of the elements that fascinates me is the later round guy, or maybe not necessarily that the first 20 picks or 32 picks, right. And they go on to have a illustrious career. And you're like, man, it's got to be his brain. He's able to do things faster and more decisive than most human beings on the planet.
Well, I'll tell you, just from a Drew Brees perspective, because I know my guy is like 6 feet, 6'1" or whatever. We've evaluated tens of. He's probably 5'7", 5'7" media guys.
5'11", yeah.
Easy now. He's an ally.
Yeah. So we've evaluated tens of thousands of athletes across all sports and ages, and Drew Brees has the highest instinctive learning score we've ever seen. I mean, he can just pick up on the subtlest tendencies, the subtlest things, and pick you apart. So that's a special gift that essentially you would be like, well, I mean, what makes Drew Brees? Well, if he's picking you apart really early and adjusting his play, So, well, you said something that I personally want to dig in from a player development perspective. You said essentially you're getting some S2 scores and you're sort of tailoring situations, right?
Yeah.
It's hard work. It's really hard work developing a player. Let's say, okay, this kid's got low impulse control. How do we schedule? How do we set up drills and drill work over time and one-on-one time to get that better? Do you find it's more adaptive or more helpful for a coach to set up the playbook or set up the situations that that player is in, or do the hard sort of drill work? Like, what makes the most sense to you?
Yeah.
It's probably different whether you got a 14-year-old versus you got a college guy.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think to kind of give a cop-out answer, I think it's a little bit of both. I think the thing that I understand, for example, with decision complexity is a really good example. If you have someone that's elite in many other categories but has a low decision complexity score, their ability to move through if-then statements is difficult, then, potentially simplifying their decision-making process, whether it's simply just the play call, the progression, having things that allow, because there's for a quarterback, there's pre-snap and there's post-snap, and there's pre-snap for a lot of guys is just as important as post-snap, right? And so there, things like visual learning and decision complexity and instinctive learning, and for that matter, distraction control. I think those things are all happening pre-snap regardless, right? And then post-snap, some of these things are going to bleed into the next level, but then, search efficiency post-snap is huge. And then obviously tracking capacity is huge. And so there's elements, I think, pre and post that I think have blended. And so I think I'm passionate about how we train athletes, period. I think there's a lot of wasted time in practice. There's a lot of wasted movements in practice. And I think there's more stuff we can get out of our athletes, regardless of level. I'm talking, youth football through the NFL. Coaches can do a better job of researching and understanding how learning actually works and putting your athletes in situations to excel from a technical standpoint, but also that tactical side of making decisions. And then, yes, if I know an athlete has a certain deficiency in an area, then being able to, craft the playbook in a manner, or be more, hey, listen, split the field in half for a guy that has a poor tracking capacity issue, right? It's like, we're going to cater our concepts so we can eliminate one side pre-snap and post-snap. We're just going to work one side. We're going to take away full field progressions. If it's a complexity issue, then a decision complexity issue, then we're going to have a lot less if-then statements. And coaches love if-then statements. They're like, so it's like, oh yeah, if the star backer does this, and then the post safety does this, and then we've got trap coverage over here. It's like you can work yourself down time. There's some guys that can smash that. Like I have my son. I have my own lab rat, which is really super cool. Because I get to coach quarterbacks, and then I have my son, and I know his S2 scores, and he's pretty exceptional in decision complexity, and to the point where I'm like, oh, this is 100% from your mom, because this is not for me. And he's able to work through these layers. I'm just like, how did you remember all that? And then it makes sense, right? But crafting drills. I did a presentation years ago for a coaching conference, and one of the things that was it was on individual time for quarterbacks, how we structure that individual time, and then drilling down into what makes a great drill, right? And so the game of football is highly complex. It's a highly complex game, and so your drills have to represent the game. And so if you want to make something more simple, you just have to lower the levels of complexity in the drilling. And so I always felt like a great drill had an element of pressure. It has a decision in it, and it has some kind of distraction in it. And so once you craft your training around that, especially in season, then I think coaches have a better chance at developing, athletes that are going to excel better at game-like situations rather than, look pretty throwing a football into a trash can.
Well, I want to get to one thing, one question real quick. But before that, when we were talking to Kirk, he was like, I mean, what? They're out there in their shorts and they're throwing balls that are 70 yards in the air on the run, and it looks great, but you're not going to do that on Sundays. And it's fascinating to hear that from someone who's lived it at the highest level for that long.
Right.
What would you change about conventional quarterback coaching?
Well, the NFL is an interesting one because these guys are experts at the chess side of it in terms of, the strategy of setting up players versus players and schemes versus schemes, and understanding this coach likes doing this and this coach likes doing that. And then there's a pretty large drop off, which people like myself have created careers on in terms of the technical side of things, right? It's like, I'm a better technical quarterback coach than every single quarterback coach in the NFL in terms of understanding biomechanics of a throwing mechanics, and, how to develop a thrower. And I don't think any of these guys would have a problem saying that anymore. They know that a quarterback coach in the NFL is not a technical throwing coach. But the problem is there's a bunch of time filled, this individual time. There's, it's like, we're going to work on these drills, and to steal a term from baseball, a lot of it's just eyewash. It's fake fundamentals. In terms of we're getting activity out of our athletes, but we're not actually helping them progress as a player that's on the field. So, for example, routes on air, right? So routes on air, for people that don't know, is a segment. It's on every single practice script in from high school to the NFL, and it is basically a quarterback dropping back and throwing to a single receiver that is running against nobody. And so the theory behind it is that if we get really good at the timing of it, meaning hey, when I hit my fifth step, he's hit his seventh step, he's out of the break, I place the ball at 22 yards, 2 yards outside the hash, with an arc level of, of a 1.5 ball. And it looks beautiful. It's amazing. It's so good. It's and so we do this all year round. And at the younger levels, it has a little bit more validity in terms of figuring out timing and learning your athletes. But as soon as you step on the field, there's 20 other players that are trying to disrupt or prevent disruption from happening, right? And so innately, I think we build timing, and some guys, because of their cognitive side, are better at figuring those things out. But there's one or two other players that are trying to disrupt that timing. And so spending a considerable amount of time on throwing routes on air, at week 5 in the season, you're just getting your guys tired. So as many times as you can have your players interact with another position group, another person, where there's some level of complexity, where they have to navigate through pressure or some distraction. And then that's where I think the real progress is made in coaching, right? Less individual time, more group time, more complexity, more interaction, more chaos, the better. And the reason why we don't go there is because coaches innately, not even coaches, just people, it's it gets messy, but learning is messy, right?
The game is messy.
Good when my cue goes out there. Yeah. It's we just completed every single pass and routes in air, high five. And again, there's value to that, but that's not the game, right? And so there has to be a transfer of training at some point. And so there's a point of diminishing returns with everything, I think, at some point. And it's a traditional game. We tend to do things the way we do things. But I always like to say, well, what if we did it this way? What if we look at it this way?
Sounds like I need to come out to a St. Augustine high school practice, see what that looks like.
That's right.
Drill.
That's right. That's what I'm saying.
We get after it.
Yeah. Yep. We just heard from an expert, essentially what you're talking about is, what's your contingency plan, right? And the NFL offensive coordinator, now head coach, said, what's your contingency plan? Because everything's not there. You can work on timing, space, rhythm, all these things on air. And then all of a sudden you have 11 people that are trying to disrupt it.
Absolutely. Yep. It is. There's the play that's called and the play that happens, and I think understanding that, we can.
Oh, I'm going to steal that.
Yeah,
Tagline of the podcast episode.
Exactly. Well, and I think understanding that, and again, there is a level of understanding that we have to have as athletes and coaches of how the play looks if it is run perfectly. And then, the great ones, the Breezes and the Bradys and the Rodgers, they recognize those patterns on the defense, and they know that, well, this guy in this position is going to disrupt this play in this manner. So I'm going to, this is the game within the game that they're playing, which I think is the ultimate level we want to get to. But we want to get there. We have to allow athletes to do that. My thing always at practice, with my high school team, I'm always like pleading my coach, hey, I want more 11-on-11 drills. I want more team stuff. I love that stuff. And again, it's messy. But to me, it's like in the weight room, it's so good with athletes, right? Like when you max out and you fail, you get stronger. And so there's this element of like in the weight room where it's accepted that you push a weight and you don't make it, but you tried, and that helps you the next time you try it. For the rest of, athletics, it's like you do something, you fail, and it's coaches like, oh, that's gross. Like, I'm not doing that again, right? But sometimes it's like, if we took that same approach, like, no, like we're just one step better to, one step closer to a better rep. And so we have to go there. We have, and I think there's a little bit of leap of faith and trust that we have to take. But, I think that's, we got to differentiate ourselves somehow. And I think coaches that are willing to do that, and you see the results.
So looking at this non-conventional quarterback way of training, specifically, how have you trained tracking capacity, decision complexity? You've touched on that a bunch. Impulse control, distraction control. How have you put that into drills for your quarterbacks to do for the transfer effect, like you alluded to earlier?
Yeah, absolutely. So it depends on what level I'm getting in terms of a quarterback at and what we're training for. So on one end of it, my 100% focus is going to be on the technical side of things with literally no decision making, right? And if you want to change things from a technical standpoint, complexity can be an enemy for that, right? It's like if you want to focus on a motor pathway change, eliminating variables helps athletes, for like a better throwing stroke, right? And so when we're working on that, my drills, the complexity level is 0. It's boring. It's the most boring work in the world. To the point where we will take the football out of the hand because the football will give us feedback that we don't necessarily want sometimes. But once we've accomplished that and we've worked with an athlete long enough and we can understand how they work cognitively, then we want to develop situations and scenarios as trainers to then help them improve aspects of their game. And if you're working with multiple quarterbacks, the amount of time you can spend technically is reduced. And so tactically is typically when you have more than one quarterback, you can do some great things with athletes working together. And so we have a drill that we use frequently where we have the quarterback, we call it choice drill. And it's basically a layered decision-making process with all elements. And so one of the elements is, the quarterback and the receiver are not facing each other. So their backs are to each other. And again, the purpose of this drill is to create a decision that will transfer into the game, right? And the receiver has a choice to go right or left on a command, and the quarterback hears the command. He has to get out of his drop and then react to the receiver going a particular direction and get the ball to the receiver before they reach a certain point, right? So you'll see good quarterbacks will react quickly. They'll be technically sound enough and be able to deliver the football before the receiver's out of bounds, essentially, right? And it's a small-sided game, so it's a smaller field of play that we do it on. And then we add other layers into it, whether it's an additional defender or an additional distraction, someone rushing, where there is a rapid decision that has to be made. And you put that athlete in a situation over and over again where they have to make that decision, that yes/no decision, and you give them permission, like you want them to explore and figure it out, and they might throw it in the incorrect spot. They might throw an interception. They might force it, right? So whenever you can reduce the number of players you're working with, create an environment where they're forced to make a throw or not make a throw. You can work on things like impulse control and search efficiency. It restricts it and simplifies it in a manner where the quarterback has to make a decision, and you have to give them permission to roll with whatever decision they make. And once you do that, I think the player starts to learn a little bit more about themselves. They start to, dig deeper into that particular, that throw. So if you go with too many decisions too early, you get no decision, right? And so simplifying the amount of decisions you have to work through, restricting their vision in some capacity, pre-snap, post-snap, distraction wise. And you can't do that with pre-planned drills where you're shuffling through bags, you're jumping on ladders. That doesn't, they know where they have to go. That's a dance recital. That's different. That doesn't transfer into football. And people will die on that hill because big colleges and big pro teams do that type of thing. I don't think it has the value it has is very small in comparison to everything else.
Yeah. So I can remember probably 5 or 6 years ago now, we were at the quarterback collective and these guys are throwing balls to receivers that were either breaking right or left. And these guys were 100% accurate, beautiful. And I don't remember if it was Scott or myself. I was like, okay, let's put a linebacker there. And the linebacker isn't going to cover anybody. The linebacker is just going to break left or right, whatever he wants to do. All of a sudden, accuracy started going down a little bit. Guys are about 80%. And then we're like, okay, how about we have a lineman run at the quarterback, but the quarterback knows he's not going to get hit at all. And all of a sudden, you're talking about game time completion percentages, like 65% on these elite high school quarterbacks with just one receiver and 2 distractors. And so just adding layers on like that can really, it's simple, but can really sort of mimic what you're doing in game speed.
That's 100%. And I get to see it in practice every day. Al from again, and we do routes on there because we're young and we're still learning how to do things correctly at both the quarterback and the receiver position. And it's early in the season. But as we progress, and we're at a moment of progression now where, like, with our quarterbacks, I will add an element of pressure on routes on air. So they're not just dropping back with this clean pocket, and it's just one person, and it may come, it may not. They may stand there, may get in the way. And so then we put an element on the quarterback, to then have to navigate through one more layer, right? Another good way I think coaches can, if you a lot of times the offensive line and defensive line have segments where they work together, and they'll be doing like pass protection and working on combo blocks. If you can steal and throw one of your quarterbacks in that drill, and they only have to have one target to throw. Right. It could be just one stationary target. But that stationary target, that may be on the left, maybe in the middle, maybe in the right. It may jog, it may run, it may do something different. But they have the pocket they have to navigate as well. Like, that's a really good way to start working on pocket presence, which essentially equates to distraction control and kind of layers into how impulse control works as well. So I think those, especially with a shorter quarterback, right? It's like, and it may feel for some guys like they can't see as much, but we know that the cognitive data says, I think you said 3.5% matters, height equates for, right? We're seeing it right now with more shorter NFL quarterbacks than ever before having success. And so, because they've done it enough, they've been out there and they have the cognitive skills to navigate through that. But anytime you can put your cues in those situations where there's maybe maximal distractions with a very singular, easy decision to make post snap, I think is really helpful. And then flip it around, less distractions and lots of decisions post snap, which is essentially what 7-on-7 is.
Yeah. Right.
That's where that is.
From a coaching perspective, and I hope there are coaches and sports scientists listening to this, but this is absolute gold with respect to understanding how science can inform the way we train. And really, to highlight what you said, and you said it very, very well, is that you have to have intention about what you're doing, why you're doing something in practice. Is there a purpose behind doing drills with no decisions? Absolutely, especially at the young level when you need to learn. So motor learning needs to be uninterrupted, right? We can't throw interruptions and decisions when you're trying to get somebody to learn a motor task. We know this from golf, we know this from soccer and other literature bases. But once you've got that, once you've learned the offense, once you've learned the mechanics and those kinds of things, you have to have intention behind, okay, now what am I asking my quarterback to do, right? Now I'm trying to force him to make decisions like he's going to make in the game. If you never mimic the types of decisions, the types of cognitive processing you have to do in the game, it's not just going to magically happen in the game.
Exactly. Yep. No, that's perfect.
Yeah, Brent. So Brandon, literally to that point, Will, have you seen these guys that you've put through these drills that you're creating? It's a very creative approach to these drills. Have you seen them improve on the field with decision making in those areas that you're trying to target?
Yeah. So one of the things that I've definitely seen is that once understanding scores and athletes, when you put them in those drills, some that are on like a very high level, the drill is easy for them. So just from an evaluative standpoint, you can tell like, oh, this kid's good. I knew he was good, but now I know he's really good, because the drill ends up being quite easy for them, or easier than the others right off the bat, right? And it's like that, so from an evaluative standpoint, you can work through some things pretty quickly just by putting them in these situations. And it marries up nicely with the scores. And so, but from a seeing progress, for me, the difficult thing is that I train athletes all off season, and then, then they go off to their teams. Right. And so some of them will sit on the sideline the entire year if they're on a professional roster or, collegiate roster, and some will play and some won't. And so they will get better. I will see that get better. I can speak to personally with, again, my lab rat, being able to see it just works out well, understanding how his cognition works. And again, the approach to training that we've had, that he's been exposed to, there's certain things that he does that have become very easy and second nature, that we just don't even, literally don't worry about it. Like we're not working on like throwing mechanics. There'll be little cues on certain things, but like in the season, we're focused on everything is about having intent in terms of, restricting movement. Like you're going to stay in the pocket. We're not going to bail no matter what. You take the sack, just to force these issues. In 7-on-7, being able to work through more complex decisions, more layers. And then just watching that natural evolution happen, through the off season and practice, et cetera. It's been really, really fun to observe. And then, I get to see it from watching the film this next off season, what guys have had some success doing some of these things, and what guys have still things to work on, et cetera. But yeah, it's been a really, really, encouraging thing to see, like, okay, this style of training works, and if we do more of it, I think guys will be better.
Will, before we get to the last segment of this podcast, is there anything you'd like to promote? Anything you'd like to touch on that we didn't get to?
I think, I'm just encouraged. I appreciate you guys having me on, and I love learning, but I also love helping others learn as well. So I'm continually figuring this whole thing out. From a promotion standpoint, Quarterback Collective, I think, is an awesome organization that I've been blessed to be a part of for the past 5 years. Richmond Flowers is the founder of that, which is also the collective sports advisor, the agent side of it as well. He works with a lot of NFL coaches, currently a ton of head coaches and coordinators and position coaches. I'm based out here in Jacksonville. We work at Torque Sports Performance as a performance partner, Dr. Tom Gormelli, who's a brilliant mind, working with a lot of top NFL quarterbacks the movement, the physical side of things, the arm care, the arm health, the full spectrum of development for quarterbacks. And then 6 points, the facility that we use, indoor facility. The Denny Thompson is a founder there, and he's one of the premier trainers nationwide. And I'm lucky enough to him that kind of come on and let me use his facility. We work together with all the athletes, and that's been really, really good. And then so that crew right there, I think we've had an awesome opportunity to work together and really like minds, work build some pretty cool coaching approaches and have a lot of success with some athletes we're currently working with.
So if a quarterback wants to get in touch with you, check out one of those organizations. Yeah, exactly. Yep.
Probably it's best directly from a training standpoint. Look up 6 Points Jacks online or through social media. We have a lot of people that want to work with us, and we got a limited schedule, so it's hard to get in. But we rarely take on too many new clients, but we still do. And then so once we roll into this next probably January period with draft prep, we'll have room for training for other athletes at different levels as well.
Cool. Man, that's awesome. That is awesome. So we end the podcast and guest with 3 random and funny questions that have absolutely nothing to do with what we just talked about. Are you ready?
Let's do it.
Okay, this is going to be controversial. Do you consider cereal to be a soup?
Ooh, I've actually never thought about that. And I guess it's like a cold soup, isn't it? It really is. I'm going to go with yes. I'm going to call it soup from now on.
Nice.
I like
we
that.
Just changed his life.
Right.
At least we changed his kid's life.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, I did.
Yeah.
You eating soup for breakfast, son?
It's brilliant.
The second is if you could be a fly on the wall for any conversation, who would you listen to?
Aaron Rodgers. No hesitation.
Aaron and anybody else?
Oh, anybody else?
Just Aaron.
Yeah, I mean, probably him talking to
Yes.
I literally have a list of questions I'm going to ask the guy when I meet him once, so we'll get there. I've met all of his coaches, everyone around him. I've never met Aaron. I'm going to meet him, and I got some questions for that guy.
Just a note on your phone of all the things you got to run through.
Oh yeah.
And the last one was, if Netflix was to produce a movie about your life, who's playing the actor?
Oh, Brad Pitt. Are you kidding me?
Brad Pitt. Boom.
Brad Pitt.
Yeah. He's the man. I'm a huge Brad Pitt fan. My wife is too. He's getting a little older, but yeah, I'm going to go Brad Pitt. Go Brad Pitt. Is he cool anymore? I'm not even sure.
I just had that Bullet Train movie.
Yeah.
Can't promote it.
Yeah.
Don't know it. Haven't seen it.
I mean, there's probably some younger actor. Who's my guy that's he's in a bunch
You're
of
like 6'4", aren't you, Will?
Peaky Blinders. Yeah, I'm pushing 6'5".
How about,
so I don't know. Maybe
my guy Thor. The guy, Thor. Yes, there you go.
Ooh, Hemsworth.
Yes,
Boom.
Yes, there you go. Yeah.
Could be his brother with the hair and maybe
muscle.
not Chris, but could be Liam.
Not quite the muscle.
That's right.
Yeah.
So awesome talking to you.
Thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it.
I appreciate y'all. Thank you so much for having me on.